Hi, my name is Adelina, I'm 34 years old, and honestly, sometimes I'm surprised at how quickly time has flown by since I first got a job. Now I'm a customer service manager at a reputable company, not one where they forget about you after a week, but one where they know you by name, where your boss greets you in the hallway, and where your paycheck arrives on time, which, whatever you say, is a rarity in itself. The job pays well, so well that I can finally allow myself to dream of what I've been dreaming about for years: a home of my own, walls that will be my own, a kitchen where every cup has its place, and no one tells me it's time to move out because the lease is ending. I've lived in this rented apartment for too long, with its old wallpaper, dripping faucet, and upstairs neighbor who's always drilling something. Every month, writing the rent check felt like I was throwing money away, like I was feeding a bottomless pit, and yet, I persevered, saving up, saving, turning down vacations, new dresses, even that blue coat I so wanted, and now, years later, I've managed to save enough for a down payment, a step I'd dreamed of but was afraid to even mention out loud, for fear of jinxing it. I started working with a realtor, a woman named Carol, energetic, talkative, with that special instinct that distinguishes good realtors. She found several promising options for me, homes that seemed so real to me that I could already see myself on their porch, sipping coffee at dawn. The only problem was my old car. As luck would have it, it broke down just when I needed it most and was now sitting in the shop, waiting for parts to be replaced. I had to take taxis and Uber, which wasn't very convenient, especially when the trips became daily. My parents live only 30 minutes away from me, but sometimes it feels like a lifetime separates us. My dad works in construction, a simple, tired man, but with a firm gaze and calloused hands. My mom is a school secretary, a strict but caring woman who still bakes pies on Sundays and worries if I don't answer the phone. They are good people, but their whole lives they've paid a little more attention to my younger brother, David. He's 29, and, to put it mildly, stability isn't his strong suit. He's constantly getting new jobs, then quitting, then getting fired, and each time he has an excuse. His boss is stupid, his colleagues are jealous, his schedule is inconvenient. I decided to tell them about my plans at the next Sunday dinner. I wanted to share, to hear at least a drop of pride in their voices. When I walked into the house, the smell of fried chicken and fresh bread greeted me, like childhood. David was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, barely looking up. Mom was busy at the stove, Dad was reading the newspaper. I sat down at the table, took a deep breath, and while Mom was setting the dishes in front of us, I said, "I've saved enough money to buy a house. I'm working with a realtor, looking at properties, and it's all becoming a reality." Mom looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, and smiled her warm, slightly bewildered smile. "That's wonderful, dear," she said. "How much are you willing to spend?" Dad put the newspaper down and peered over his glasses. "Yes, tell me, what's your budget?" "I'm looking at houses for around $600,000, I replied, feeling a little nervous. I have enough for a good down payment. And suddenly David, who had been completely indifferent until then, perked up, as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room. He sat up straighter, turned to me, and said, "You know, I'm not working right now, so I can help you. I can take you to look at houses. You said your car was in the shop, right?" I couldn't believe my ears at first. David and help, words that rarely went together in the same sentence. "That's really very kind of you," I said cautiously. He shrugged, smiling a little self-assuredly. "Well, I know a bit about this. I can give you a second opinion so you don't get ripped off." And at that moment, it seemed to me that maybe he really was changing, that maybe life had taught him something, too. "Okay," I said. "I'm meeting with a realtor tomorrow. We'll go look at houses. If you really want to, I'd be happy to join you." "Definitely," he replied. "Write me the details, I'll pick you up." And you know what? He actually showed up. The next day, exactly at the appointed hour, David's car pulled up at my entrance, and we began our little adventure, searching for a house that might just be the beginning of my new life. Over the next 2 weeks, we probably saw about 15 different houses, and every time I climbed into David's car, I caught myself thinking that this whole thing felt like a strange journey, where I was finally becoming a grown woman, choosing my place in the sun. My realtor, wasting no time, set up appointments one after another, and we drove around the city, from neat, Quiet streets with blooming gardens to gloomy neighborhoods where houses stood too close together, as if huddled in fear. David turned out to be surprisingly punctual. He arrived on time, joked, brightened the mood, and, I must admit, was genuinely helpful. David may be that perpetually unsettled man who can't hold down a job, but he had a keen eye for things I probably wouldn't have noticed, for small but important details, for problems hidden behind a fresh coat of paint and the vanilla scent that sellers so love to mask trouble. In one house, which looked almost perfect from the outside, white shutters, a flower bed by the entrance, a neat porch, he suddenly frowned and said, "Adelina, come look here." I went over, and he pointed to the tile around the toilet. "See how it's warped? And can you smell it? There's something wrong with the plumbing." I leaned in. Sure enough, beneath the surface shine, I could sense something unpleasant, damp. The realtor, of course, tried to downplay it, saying it was nothing, just an old house, but David insisted, "No, let's look at the basement." We went downstairs, and the smell was unmistakable, musty, heavy, with stains on the walls that indicated water had been there more than once. "Don't even think about it," David said firmly. "Repairing this place will cost you thousands." I looked at him and felt a strange relief, as if someone had saved me from making a rash move. We abandoned this house and moved on. It was the same with the others. In one, he noticed a crack in the foundation, which the realtor dismissed as natural settling. In another, a strange flickering light, prompting David to immediately declare, "The electrical system is old, everything will have to be replaced." Sometimes he seemed overly picky, almost tedious, but each time he pointed out another problem. I realized he was saving me from potentially costly mistakes, and the longer our search lasted, the more I began to respect his vision, his confidence, his ability to see what I'd missed behind facades and flowers. And finally, after 2 weeks of nonstop driving and discussing, we found it, a house that immediately seemed to speak to me, beautiful, in a quiet, cozy neighborhood where you can hear birds singing in the morning and smell the fresh grass in the evening, a spacious living room with large windows, a sunny kitchen where I could already imagine myself sipping coffee, and a bedroom I wanted to walk into barefoot. The price, $600,000, was exactly what I'd been expecting, and an inspection showed the house was in excellent condition, with no hidden surprises. Everything seemed perfect. I was so excited I could hardly sit still when the realtor brought the paperwork. She worked almost nonstop to get everything sorted, and within a week I had signed the mortgage papers. $600,000 was the largest sum I'd ever handled, and as I signed the documents, I felt both fear and excitement, as if I were standing on the threshold of a new life. This was my home, my decision, my pride. And it seemed like everything was going perfectly, but life has its surprises. Literally the day after the deal was closed, my boss called me into his office. He spent a long time explaining something about a new project, an important client, a presentation in Phoenix, and then said, "Adelina, you're the only one I can entrust this to. Go away for 2 weeks, it's important." Of course, I couldn't say no. Work has always been a matter of principle for me. If I do something, I do it well. That evening, I called David. "I need a small favor," I said. "I'm going away for 2 weeks on business, and I'd like you to change the locks on the house, just in case. I'll pick up the keys when I get back." He answered immediately, without hesitation, "Sure, no problem, I'll take care of everything." The next day, I flew to Phoenix. The flight was silent. I stared out the window and thought about my home, imagining how I'd return, how I'd open the door with my own keys. But as soon as I arrived, work consumed me. Long days, nerves, meetings, presentations. I barely had time to eat, let alone think about moving. One evening, I called David, just to make sure everything was in order. "How are the locks?" I asked. He answered easily, almost cheerfully, "Everything is ready. I changed them yesterday. Your home is safe." 2 weeks later, I finally returned home, exhausted, but happy. I couldn't wait to see my house, my first real home, now with new locks and the smell of fresh air. I still had 2 months left on my apartment lease, so I was in no rush to move. I decided to take things slowly, maybe repaint the walls, buy new curtains, get used to the idea that I now had a place where I finally felt like home. The day after returning from Phoenix, I woke up early, before dawn, with that special feeling when life opens a blank page before you. Plans whirled through my head, to walk through the house, finally walk like a real homeowner, to touch the walls, breathe in its air, imagine where the bed would be, where the sofa would be, and how the morning sun would fall on the kitchen table. I poured myself a coffee, sat by the window, dialed David's number, and, smiling, said when he answered, "Hi, David. I'm back, could you get me the house keys?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, not just a pause, but a tense, strange, cold silence, as if he hadn't expected my call. Then he spoke, and his words stabbed me like a knife. "Actually, I can't give you the keys right now," he said calmly, without a hint of apology. It took me a moment to process what I'd heard. "What do you mean, you can't?" I asked, my voice shaking, and then he said something that made my hands go cold. "Well, I've decided to live in your house for a while, with my girlfriend. You're not moving in yet anyway, we're just getting settled in, you don't mind, right?" I didn't even answer right away, because my brain refused to process the phrase. "What are you even talking about, David? This is my house, mine. I bought it." I almost screamed, not believing I was being forced to explain the obvious, and he, as if nothing had happened, said, "Yes, but I talked to Mom and Dad, they don't mind if I stay there for a while, they think it's fair." For a second, I was speechless. This couldn't be true, some kind of ridiculous, sick joke. "David, this is crazy, you need to give me the keys and get out of there immediately," I said, trying not to break down, and then he laughed, a real, cheerful, almost friendly laugh. "Relax, Adelina, everything is under control. I've already discussed everything with my parents, everything is fine with them." I couldn't believe my ears, anger rose in my chest, so hot that I could barely breathe. I hung up and immediately called a taxi, because my car was still parked at the workshop, and I simply couldn't sit and wait. As I drove, I clenched my hands so tightly that my nails left marks on my palms. Only one thought echoed in my head: he's taken over my house. When the taxi stopped at the gate, I jumped out without even thanking the driver and ran to the door. My heart was pounding. I knocked with all my might. "David, open the door. Now!" I screamed, pounding my fist on the wood until my knuckles ached. No answer. But I could hear someone inside, footsteps, voices, a soft feminine laugh. I knew he was there, simply ignoring me. "David, I hear you. Open the door." But the silence only intensified my rage. After about 5 minutes, I had enough. "If you don't open the door right now, I'll call the police. You're illegally occupying my house." I screamed. For a second, everything inside went silent, as if frozen, and suddenly my phone rang. Mom appeared on the screen. "Adelina, darling, what's going on?" My mother's voice was tired but gentle, as if she already knew what she was about to say. I bit my lip, trying to speak calmly. "Mom, David won't let me into my own house. He changed the locks like I asked, but now he's decided to live there with his girlfriend. This is crazy." "Adelina, calm down," my mother said in a tone I knew all too well, the tone she always used when defending David. "Come over here, we'll discuss this calmly, this is a family matter." "Mom, I'll call the police if he doesn't open the door immediately." I almost screamed, and then I heard her sharp, almost commanding voice on the other end of the line. "Don't you dare. You won't involve the police, this is our family, and we'll handle this ourselves, come over immediately." I stood by the door, breathing heavily, feeling the blood rushing in my temples. My arm ached from the blows, but I hit him again, this time out of pure anger, so hard that my skin ached like a burn. Seeing no point in staying there any longer, I called another taxi. 20 minutes later, I was already entering my parents' house, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I blurted out, "I want to know if it's true that you told David he could live in my house." My voice trembled, but the words were firm. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and that brief glance between them was the answer beyond words. Then Mom sighed and nodded quietly. "That's true," she said, "but David didn't do anything wrong. He just decided to live there temporarily. He needed a place to be alone with his girlfriend for a while. It won't be long." I looked at them, unable to comprehend how any of this had become possible, how the house I'd bought, earned with every sleepless night and every saved dollar, had suddenly become a comfortable place for someone else's whim. "Are you kidding me?" I asked, and my voice rang out with such force that even Dad flinched, as if caught in a sudden wind. I couldn't believe my ears, couldn't wrap my mind around what was happening. I bought this house. I'm paying the mortgage. It's my home, do you understand? David has no right to be there. Mom shook her head, as if I were a foolish child who couldn't grasp the obvious. He needs this more than you do right now, she said quietly, almost tenderly, but there was something in that gentleness that made my insides clench. You have to understand his situation. Dad put the newspaper down, leaned forward, and looked at me with a tired gaze that suddenly seemed less reproachful and more like a reluctance to get involved. Adelina, you still have an apartment, he said calmly. You'll live there for 2 months, right? And David and his girlfriend simply have nowhere to go. Let him live for a while until he gets on his feet, finds a job, and rents his own place. It's just for a couple of months, no more, and then he'll move out, and you can move in peacefully. His voice was reasonable, balanced, as if he were talking about something mundane and not worth discussing. I looked at them both and didn't recognize my family. Everything that was happening seemed like some kind of absurd dream. This isn't normal, I said quietly, trying not to break down. This can't happen. This isn't just a couple of months. This is an invasion. This is, I faltered, anger already rising in my chest, hot and sticky. I'll call the police. Mom sat up abruptly, her voice, usually calm, became firm, almost icy. If you call the police on your brother, we'll stop talking to you. Do you hear me? This is a family matter, and we're handling it as a family. At that moment, I realized there was no point in arguing. They'd already made up their minds. Adeline, dear, Dad said, more gently, with that intonation that always made me want to give in, you've always been such a good sister. You always helped David when he was having trouble. We're just asking you to help him one more time. He said it so calmly, as if he were talking about a cup of sugar and not my house. And, of course, I felt that familiar, nasty feeling, the guilt that had been ingrained in me since childhood. It always worked when it came to David. I could be angry, hurt, but somewhere deep down, I knew I had to be understanding. I looked at my parents and realized, yes, they were completely serious. They really expected me to let David live in my house while I paid the mortgage. 2 months, I finally said, no more. He's leaving in 2 months, not a day longer. Mom sighed with relief and smiled almost solemnly, as if we'd just made some important family agreement. Thank you, dear, she said, I knew you'd understand. I turned and left without saying goodbye. My heart was pounding dully, my ears were ringing. I didn't remember how I got to the apartment, but once home, I simply sank onto the couch. My phone vibrated, a message from David. Thank you, little sister, I really appreciate it. I stared at the screen, disbelieving. Everything that was happening seemed like some surreal performance, in which I suddenly found myself playing a supporting role. I had a house, but I couldn't live in it. I, an adult, independent person paying a mortgage, was forced to give way to my unemployed brother, who wanted to start a personal life. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept returning to one thing. He was there, living in my house, walking through my rooms, sleeping in my bedroom. I caught myself imagining him using my kitchen, touching my things, and it sent shivers down my spine. After a couple of days, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to make sure it was true, that I wasn't going crazy. My car was finally fixed, and I drove there. When I pulled up, my heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty. I knocked on the door. This time, David opened the door almost immediately, with a wide, self-assured smile. Hey, Adeline. Come in, he said, as if I were visiting a friend. I walked in, and already at the threshold, I realized I hadn't been mistaken. In the living room, on my couch, sat a girl, young, well-groomed, with impeccably styled blonde hair and a manicure that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. This is my girlfriend, Brianna, David said proudly, as if introducing someone special. Brianna looked up from her phone, gave me a look of lazy superiority, and said, Oh, you're my sister. David was telling me about you. Well, next time, maybe you should call first. We were actually about to leave. I didn't immediately understand what she was saying. Call? I asked, feeling irritation boiling inside me. It's my house. Brianna shrugged, her lips curling into a barely perceptible smile. Suit yourself, but David and I live here now, so maybe you should respect our privacy and let us know when you're coming over. I felt my insides tighten with rage. Sorry, I said coldly, but this is my privacy, this is my house, I pay the mortgage. Look, I really don't care whose name is on the papers, Brianna said casually, not even glancing at me, continuing to lazily scroll through her phone feed. as if none of this had anything to do with her. David and I live here, so these are our rules now. Her voice was so confident, as if she were dealing not with the owner of the house, but with a casual acquaintance who had wandered into the wrong building. I felt a rage boiling inside, as if a scream was about to burst from my chest, but before I could respond, David suddenly grabbed my hand. His fingers were tense, and I felt him gently but firmly pull me away from the living room. Adeline, let's go into the kitchen for a minute, okay? He whispered, trying not to let Brianna hear. He closed the door behind us, and I immediately smelled coffee and some sickly sweet vanilla, the scent of a cheap candle that his girlfriend must have brought. Listen, please, he said quietly, almost pleadingly, don't start a fight with her. She's just protecting our space. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, nervous laugh, with that bitter edge when laughter replaces tears. Our space, David? Do you hear what you're saying? This is my home. He looked down guiltily. I know, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Just try to take it easy, okay? This is temporary, just a little while longer, and everything will be fine. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Okay, I said slowly, clearly, so he would understand that I was nearing my breaking point, but I need a spare set of keys to my own house, and no parties, David, no guests, no noisy groups, no small gatherings. I'm serious. He nodded quickly, as if trying to reassure me. Yes, of course, no problem. He walked over to a drawer by the wall, pulled out a ring of keys, and handed me one. Here's your spare. I took the keys without looking at him, and without another word, walked past Brianna, who didn't even look up. A month passed, a month of dull irritation and sleepless nights, lying in bed in my rented apartment, imagining David and that girl living in my house, using my furniture, walking on my floor as if it had always belonged to them. I tried to concentrate on work, but every thought returned to this, the realization that I was paying the mortgage while they were there, living, relaxing, enjoying life, drove me crazy. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, I called David. Hi, I said, trying to speak calmly, but my voice still wavered. How's your job search going? Have you found anything yet? There was a brief pause, then his familiar, slightly confused voice answered, Yes I am, it's just that things are complicated right now. You understand. He cleared his throat, as if trying to buy himself some time, but I'm working on it, really. I closed my eyes and clenched my teeth. When are you planning on moving out, David? We agreed on 2 months, remember? There was a tense silence on the other end, then he said, I promise, I just need a little time to find the right opportunity. I hung up, feeling my insides go cold. It was clear to me, he wasn't looking for anything. David never looked for anything. He waited for others to decide everything for him. A week later, my phone rang again. The number was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. Hi, Adeline. I heard a cheerful male voice. It's Mike, remember me? An old friend of David's. Are you going to the housewarming tomorrow? I almost dropped the phone. For what? I asked, not believing my ears. Well, to David's housewarming. He said he finally bought a house and is throwing a party tomorrow to celebrate. Come at 7 o'clock. I felt my blood run cold. Mike, wait, I interrupted. What exactly did David tell you about this house? He laughed and replied, well, that he saved up for years and finally bought the house of his dreams. He said you helped him with the down payment. That was very kind of you. By the way, my breath caught in my throat. David told everyone that this was his house, my house. And on top of that, she's throwing a party, even though I made it clear, no parties. Mike, when did you say party? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Tomorrow, at 7 o'clock, he answered cheerfully. You should definitely come. David will be happy. I managed to squeeze out, yes, I will be there. The next evening, I pulled up to the house. I could still hear music blaring from inside and laughter outside. Cars were parked on both sides of the road, some even partially encroaching on the lawn. Through the windows, I saw shadows of people dancing, the flickering lights. My heart was pounding as I took my key, the spare one, from my purse and inserted it into the lock. The door opened, and I froze. The house was crowded, 30 people, maybe more. They were standing in the living room, in the kitchen, some dancing, some laughing, some pouring wine straight from the bottle into plastic cups. The music was so loud that I could barely hear myself think. and not a single one of those present even noticed that the real owner of the house had entered. I pushed through the noisy crowd, trying to spot him among the unfamiliar faces, amid the loud laughter and the smell of cheap alcohol mixed with the aroma of my own furniture. My heart pounded in my chest, as if beating off an alarm, and finally, I saw David. He stood in the kitchen, beaming like a man who owned the world, waving a bottle of beer in his hand, enthusiastically telling a story to a group of men I'd never seen before. His voice cut through the music, and every word he uttered echoed in my head. Honestly, I'd been saving up for this place for about 5 years, he boasted, drawing himself up proudly, as if he'd just received an award. My sister helped a little with the paperwork and other formalities, but the house is entirely mine. Then he laughed, glancing at one of his friends, and added with the ease of a joke, "Poor Adeline is still crammed into some squalid rented apartment while I live in my amazing house. She's always been such a loser." I felt something inside me collapse, the air in the room seemed to thicken, and I was literally choking on resentment. To keep from breaking down, I coughed loudly. The music stopped for a moment, and dozens of eyes turned to me. A heavy, awkward silence fell. Some of the people present recognized me, and their faces showed they understood what had just happened. David turned pale, and then his face instantly flushed. He hurried up to me, grabbed my hand, and, almost by force, pulled me into the hallway, away from prying eyes. "Listen, I can explain everything," he said quickly, trying to smile, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "Really?" I interrupted, barely keeping the tremor in my voice. "Are you calling me a loser, David? You live in my house, enjoy everything I paid for, and you dare portray me as some worthless woman in front of your friends?" "I didn't mean it like that," he exclaimed, waving his arms wildly. "It's just some of these guys are potential business partners. I had to look successful, you know? I wanted to make an impression. It's just temporary." He lowered his voice, looking at me pleadingly. "Please, don't tell them anything, okay? Don't make a scene." I barely kept myself from screaming. "Temporary?" I asked, feeling anger rising in my throat. "Temporarily you live in my house, temporarily make a fool of me, and temporarily lie to everyone?" "No, David, it's time to stop lying." I headed for the living room, but he grabbed my hand abruptly, squeezing it so hard it hurt. "Adeline, please," he said, almost whispering, but there was a threat in that whisper. "Don't throw everyone out, don't embarrass me in front of them. If you start now, I'll call Mom and Dad, and they'll be on my side, as always." I stopped. His words hit harder than any slap. There was something new in his voice, anger, confidence, even superiority. I looked into his eyes and realized he was enjoying it. David smiled when he saw how pale I was. "Yes," he said quietly, almost tenderly, "I've already talked to them about it. They think this house is perfect for me. Mom wants you to just transfer everything to me, forever." "What?" I whispered, not believing my ears. "What are you even talking about?" "It's simple," he said calmly, as if discussing something ordinary. "You're older, you should take care of your little brother. Mom said it's the right thing to do. I have Brianna now, and we're getting married. We need this house." I looked at him and couldn't believe my own brother was standing before me, the same boy I once bought shoes for, helped pay for his classes, brought him food when he lost yet another job. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. "What then?" Then, he narrowed his eyes slightly and chuckled. "They'll disown you, completely, Dad too. We've already discussed everything." I remained silent. Everything that was happening seemed like a dream, some absurd, wild nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I saw David's lips moving, but I couldn't hear the words. It was as if a wall had risen between us. A stranger stood before me. "Are you serious?" I finally exhaled. "Absolutely," he answered calmly, looking straight into my eyes. "This house suits Brianna and me, and you can find something else. You have a good job, you can handle it." I don't remember leaving the house. I just remember standing by the car, clutching the keys, my fingers shaking so hard they jingled against the metal. I didn't say a word to him, I just drove away. Already behind the wheel, I dialed Mom. Her voice, calm and tired, sounded familiar, almost gentle. "Mom," I began, feeling my chest tighten, "did you really tell David that I should give him my house?" "Well, yes," she answered calmly, as if it were something ordinary. "You've already made a career, you have everything, but David needs help starting his life. He has a girlfriend, he wants to get married, they need their own place." Who's going to pay the mortgage, Mom? I asked, my voice shaking. Mom seemed genuinely surprised. Well, of course, you, dear. David doesn't have a job yet, but he'll definitely start helping out someday. I fell silent, every word she spoke felt like a knife stabbing me. I see, I said quietly and hung up. When I returned to my apartment, everything inside felt charred. I went to the closet, opened it, and started taking out my suitcase. I'd had enough. Tomorrow I'd put an end to this madness, no matter how painful it was. The next morning, before the gray sky had cleared and the city was just beginning to slowly awaken, I called in sick, citing a feeling of ill health. My boss sounded sympathetic, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to explain to anyone that the real cause of my illness wasn't my body, but that my soul had been worn to the bone over the past few days. I got behind the wheel and drove to the house, which was still officially mine but felt stolen. I parked a little further away, opposite the old elm tree under which David and I had once shared coffee in the summer, and waited. Almost an hour had passed when David and Brianna emerged from the door. They were dressed up, laughing, and arguing animatedly about something. He touched her shoulder tenderly, and she glanced at him with false concern. They got into his car, and I saw him gesturing and telling her something, as if trying to appear successful even to her. The car pulled away from the house, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the smell of gasoline, and I let out a quiet breath. They probably went to lunch or two. The store, with money David never had, because he, my brother, had long since forgotten how to earn his own. As soon as they disappeared around the corner, I drove closer to the house. The sun finally peeked out from behind the clouds, and its light fell on the walls, on the windows that I had once spent so much time washing and decorating with curtains. A man in gray overalls stood at the gate, holding a box of tools, the locksmith I had called earlier. He turned as I got out of the car and, squinting, asked, "All the locks, right? You want to change them all?" "Every single one," I answered firmly, my voice not wavering. While he worked, I went to the car and began moving the boxes. They contained everything I needed to start a new life: clothes, a few books, photos of my parents, a favorite cracked mug, an old blanket that smelled of home. I lifted box after box, and with each step I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of what was rightfully mine. Having finished, I went upstairs. In David's bedroom stood his shirts, neatly hung on hangers, and Brianna's dresses, scattered haphazardly. On the dresser stood their perfume, shaving kit, and a couple of cups with dried coffee stains. I gathered everything: clothes, cosmetics, chargers, speakers, some cheap jewelry, even their expensive hair dryer. It all felt alien, hostile, and defiling to my home. I packed the things into huge garbage bags, one by one, tied them in knots, and carried them out to the front lawn, dumping them directly onto the grass, like trash after a long winter. When the locksmith finished, he came up to me, wiping his hands on a rag, and said with a slight smile, "It's done, now no one will enter without your permission." "Thank you," I replied, handing him the money. He nodded, wished me luck, and drove away. I closed the door behind him, turned the key in the lock, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe deeply. The silence of the house was so familiar, so deep, that I simply stood in the hallway and listened to it, like music. Finally, I was home, my home. But the peace didn't last long. It was already around 6 o'clock in the evening when I heard a car pull up outside. A second later, muffled footsteps, then voices. I went to the window. David and Brianna stood by the lawn, their expressions a mixture of rage and bewilderment. "What the hell?" David screamed, running closer. "Why is our stuff on the grass?" They started pounding on the door and ringing the doorbell, over and over again, getting louder. I went up to the second floor, opened the window, and shouted down, "Get off my property or I'll call the police." David raised his head, his face was twisted with anger. "Adeline, what did you do? Why did you throw out our stuff?" "Because this is my house," I replied calmly, though inside I was shaking, "and you don't live here anymore." He immediately pulled out his phone and started calling someone. I was sure it was Mom. Loud, accusatory words poured out of his mouth. A couple of minutes later, my own phone rang. Mom appeared on the screen, Adeline Marie. Her voice was icy. "You will let your brother back into the house immediately." "No, Mom," I said quietly but firmly, "I won't allow it." "If you don't," she continued, "we'll kick you out. We'll never speak to you again." I smiled, though my heart was breaking. Then I guess that's it, I said and hung up. Outside, David and Brianna continued shouting, pacing back and forth, demanding that I'd behave like a human being. Their voices echoed off the walls, and then finally faded. Before leaving, David shouted, "You'll regret this, Adeline." His words rang in the air like an angry oath, but I didn't answer. After they left, I sank into a chair by the window, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly quiet. I pulled out my phone, dialed my boss, and explained that I needed a few weeks to work from home. I had a family emergency, I said. It wasn't entirely a lie. He responded with understanding, promised to help, and allowed me to work remotely for as long as I needed. I set up my laptop in the bedroom, which I'd converted into a study, laid out my papers, made some tea, and tried to concentrate. It was strange. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in charge again. I ordered groceries online, arranged delivery, and resolved not to leave the house unattended anymore. I knew David too well to have any illusions. He wouldn't give up so easily. The first few days were remarkably calm, and without realizing it, I began to believe that perhaps it was finally over, that David had realized the obvious, resigned himself to it, and decided to leave me alone, that he might even have felt ashamed of his behavior and was now trying to start his life anew. I caught myself falling asleep again without worry, opening the windows to let in the morning air, and allowing myself to listen to the silence that filled the rooms of my house, the same silence that had so recently seemed impossible. But, as often happens, the calm turned out to be only a respite. Before a new storm, I should have known better. That fateful Thursday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, immersed in reports, when I heard a strange sound coming from below, a soft but persistent scraping, like someone carefully testing the strength of metal. I froze, listening, and my heart immediately began to beat faster. The sound grew clearer, and now I knew for sure, it wasn't the creaking of wood, or the wind, or the neighbor's cat. Someone was at the door. Someone was fiddling with the lock. I quietly approached the window, trying not to make the slightest sound, and, lifting a corner of the curtain, looked down, and froze. There, right by my front door, squatting, sat David. He was holding some kind of metal tool, long, shiny, and, watching him move it in the keyhole, I realized, they were master keys. He really was trying to break into my house. My own brother, whom I once defended to my parents, excused when he botched yet another job, gave him money to get back on his feet. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, detached, as if he'd heard this sort of thing 100 times. "Someone's trying to break into my house," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "They're breaking the lock right now." I gave him the address, and the operator assured me that officers were on their way. I stayed by the window, watching David's every move. He was intensely focused, as if he were doing something perfectly legal, as if he had a right to be there. His expression was irritated, as if I, not he, were trespassing. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance, and soon a police car pulled up to the house. 2 officers got out and headed for the door. "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" one asked, and David jumped, sitting up abruptly. "Oh, hello, gentlemen officers," he said, smiling tightly. "This is my house. I just accidentally locked myself out." I immediately opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. "Gentlemen officers," I said, looking directly at them, "I own this house. This man is my brother, and he doesn't live here. He's trying to break down my door." David turned to me, his eyes flashing with anger. "Adeline, tell them I live here," he shouted, his voice shaking. "No, David," I said, keeping my voice low, "you don't live here. This is my home, and I demand he be arrested for attempted trespassing." One of the officers looked at the metal tools in David's hands and frowned. "Sir, do you have paperwork permitting you to be on this property?" he asked. David turned pale. "Adeline, you can't do this to me. I'm family," he almost shouted, taking a step toward me. "Sir, you're under arrest for attempted burglary," the officer said calmly, pulling out handcuffs. "What?" David flinched, but didn't resist. The officer turned him around and snapped the metal cuffs onto his wrists. As they led him to the car, he turned around and screamed that I would regret this, that I had no right, that I had betrayed the family. I stood on the porch, hugging myself, and silently watched as the patrol car door slammed shut. and a moment later it drove away, leaving behind only the smell of rubber and the roar of the engine. Perhaps 2 hours had passed when the phone rang. It was Mom. I didn't even have time to say anything. Her voice literally cut through the air. "How dare you arrest your brother?" She screamed so loudly that I jerked the phone away. "Call the police and tell them to let him go immediately." "No, Mom," I replied calmly. "He tried to break into my house. It's a crime." "That's ridiculous," she interrupted, breathing heavily into the phone. "This is a family matter. You had no right to air it out in public." "He's a grown man, Mom," I said wearily, "and he committed a crime. I'm not calling anyone." There was a short, dead silence, and then a click. She hung up. A couple of days later, my cousin called me. His voice was uncertain, as if he didn't know whose side he should be on. He said David had been released. His parents had posted bail. I thanked him for the information and said nothing more. 3 months have passed since then. In all that time, I haven't spoken to either David or my parents, and all I know about them now is from stories told by distant relatives and acquaintances. It turns out David and Brianna are now living at their parents' house. Mom and Dad tell anyone who will listen how cruelly I treated them, how I abandoned my family for some stupid house, how I forgot where I came from, and I just remain silent, because if I say a word, it all comes crashing back. My cousin Sarah called me last week, her voice soft as always, but there was something in it that immediately told me this wouldn't be an easy conversation. "You know," she said, "your mother still tells everyone you stole David's house." I sighed, feeling that familiar feeling of weary bewilderment welling up inside me, and replied, "Steal? My own house?" Sarah lowered her voice and added, "She says you tricked him into believing the house was his, that you tricked your brother into giving up what should have been his." I couldn't help but laugh softly, a dry, joyless laugh. "That's crazy," I said, "but honestly, I'm not surprised." Sarah paused, as if choosing her words. "Your father," she said finally, "seems confused by the whole thing, but he's not denying it, he's just silent. He doesn't want to get involved." I closed my eyes, picturing my father, perpetually tired, with his downcast gaze, who preferred not to get involved in any conflict, especially between me and my mother. "What about David?" I asked. "What's he saying?" Sarah sighed heavily. "He says you arrested him without cause, that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, and that you just overreacted." I chuckled, but there was no malice or sarcasm in that chuckled smile, only a quiet realization that it probably couldn't have been any other way. "What about his girlfriend?" I asked, though I already guessed the answer. "Brianna?" Sarah responded, "She left him about a month ago. It seems life with your parents wasn't the lush fairy tale she dreamed of. She quickly grew tired of living in a house where David's mother bossed her around, and David himself was still unemployed." I thought for a moment. Did I feel sorry for her? Perhaps a little, almost, because, be that as it may, Brianna was young, naive, and perhaps simply succumbed to his charm, like so many before her. But pity quickly gave way to a cold calm, either from the realization that none of this was my responsibility, or from the fact that I had finally learned not to get caught up in other people's dramas. "And how are you, Adeline?" Sarah asked after a short pause. "Are you okay?" I smiled, looking out the window, where the garden, bathed in autumn light, shimmered in shades of amber and gold. "You know, Sarah," I said, "I feel better now than I have in years. I don't talk to them, yes, but frankly, the silence has been a blessing, and it was the pure truth. I live in my own house, a house where every corner, every detail is designed to my taste, where I chose the wall colors not because someone else liked them, but because they make me feel at peace. I bought furniture that doesn't match the style, but simply makes me happy. I created a garden, small, but mine, where everything grows just the way I want it, and every evening, when the sun sets behind the trees, I go out there with a cup of tea and think that for the first time in many years, I'm living exactly the way I've always dreamed, because it's mine." Sometimes, of course, I miss it, not the arguments, not the guilt that haunted me every time David found himself in yet another predicament, but the very fact of family, the familiar sound of the phone ringing on Sundays, my mother's short sentences, my father's quiet cough. It's strange to realize that they don't call anymore, but to be honest, I don't miss the drama, the accusations, the expectation that I'll once again have to solve other people's problems, sacrifice myself for them. My friends were shocked when they found out about everything. Some couldn't believe my parents would so openly side with David in a situation where everything was so obvious. Others said they admired me for finally setting a boundary, saying no where I'd spent so many years saying okay. My work started to improve, without the constant emotional burnout and sense of obligation to those who never appreciated my efforts. My boss even hinted that a promotion was in the cards. I smiled when he said it, not because I craved recognition, but because I knew I'd earned it myself, without anyone's help. And then, just recently, I ran into David. It happened at a grocery store, an ordinary, unremarkable one, but his mere presence made the world around me seem to shrink. He noticed me first, and I saw him hesitate, wondering if he should approach. Finally, slowly, as if forced, he approached. "Hello, Adelina," he said quietly. I nodded. "Look," he began, "I know things have been complicated. It's all about the house situation. Maybe we could sort this out?" I looked at him for a long time, calmly, without malice, but also without softness. "There's nothing to talk about, David," I finally said. "You tried to steal my house." He looked away. "That's not true," he whispered. I shook my head. "Exactly, and you know it." He seemed to want to add something, to justify himself, but I had already walked away, not wanting to hear any more explanations. I understood everything I needed to understand long ago. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving my family. I always answer the same way. No, I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm not sorry I chose myself, because one day, I saw who was who. David believed he had the right to take what wasn't his. My parents believed I had to let him do it for the sake of family peace, but I'm no longer obligated, and I finally understood a simple but bitter truth. Kinship doesn't always mean kindness. Sometimes those who are supposed to love you unconditionally hurt you the most. But I'm okay. I live in my own home, on my own terms, breathe my own air, and decide who I let into my life, and that's enough for me.